14, we have the Milwaukee Bucks.
Not surprised.
Now, excuse me, they are second in the East right now. Yes, they have lost 4 of their last 5 games. But my whole thing is, how do you have them behind the Kings, the Magic, the Pacers, the Pelicans, when they've got 2 of the best players in the league? They're still second in the Eastern Conference, just barely off the pace of the Boston Celtics. I look at this, Ashley, and I go, man, they haven't played their best basketball. They haven't been good defensively. They haven't figured it out. They have lost 4 of the last 5, and yet still second.
I mean, that speaks more, I feel like, to the Eastern Conference than it does the Milwaukee Bucks as a team. Listen, when Drew Holiday ended up in Boston via that just blockbuster situation, I said one of the concerns for me is what the Milwaukee Bucks were going to do defensively. Damian Lillard, huge fan of Dame time, but he's an offensive player. He's never been known for his defense. You get rid of the core, the anchor of your defense. He's now in Boston. They get better both offensively and defensively. Now, how do you fill that void in Milwaukee? I haven't seen it. Their game plan reminds me a lot of the Brooklyn Nets in the era of Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. The game plan is to simply outscore you. And yeah, when you're playing certain teams, you can do that. But everybody, for most part, in the NBA, if you have a star on your team, can shoot a three-pointer. And sometimes you get into these high-scoring games, as we've seen. I mean, look at the game on January 8th against Utah, 132 points the Jazz were able to put up. So if you want to get into a shootout, get into a shootout, but you run the risk of losing that if you don't have a way to stop points from happening. So I don't know how they combat that. I haven't seen a game plan on how they combat it. It constantly just looks like a shootout. And in the regular season, yeah, you'll get away with that. In the East, yeah, you'll get away with that. But when it comes to the playoffs, your bluff is going to get called every single time. So if they don't figure that out, I think there may be a situation come March, April.
This is not about the playoffs yet, though. This is about our rankings right now. Bill,
it's always about the playoffs, John. It's always about the playoffs.
They cannot possibly be 14th.
Colin's my guy, but we're gonna figure out why he hates the city of Milwaukee and its people. So clearly.
You can never go to Milwaukee again.
This is some
hot-minded guy.
This is some hot garbage. I mean, look, and by the way, Ash, you're 100% right, and that echoes what GMs told me. A few, the skeptics, and I wasn't one of them. So I want to be right. I want Milwaukee to figure it out. Their backcourt defensively is vastly weakened on the defensive end, and they're 21st in defensive rating. And last year, in the years they've had real success in the playoffs, like most teams, they've been great at both ends of the game, including defense. But let me be like, not only are they second in the East, they have the best or second best player on the face of the earth. That is significant. There is an issue with their head coach, and we'll see how that works out. But I do think we sometimes forget that even though we expect superstars who come together to immediately gel and for it to work, it's a process, and it takes time. And for LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and I cover that team, so I fall back on it. It took a season. And Damian Lillard and Giannis, I think, have made strides, but that is still a process. And I think in those two stars figuring out how to play together, yes, their defense could catch up to them. So 100%, 100% right. By the standards of our UNBA champions, how did you lose in the conference finals? That is not a 14th team. If we're talking that, they're a top 6. And by the way, Ash, they are a better team than the Knicks.
Okay.
I mean, we'll get this later. I know, but like,
hold on a second, because both you and John are not fans of where they're ranked right now. But if you look at the current power rankings, they're not ahead of Boston. That's fair, right? They're not ahead of Denver.
Very few are.
Would you put them ahead of OKC right now?
I mean, I would put them ahead of the Kings. I would put them ahead of your New York Knicks. I would put them in competition, I think, with somebody else. John, you're Sixers.
The Magic, the Pacers, the Pelicans.
The Magic
are ahead of all those teams.
Yesterday, they're like an 8 today.
Are we just looking at rankings in terms of where they are in their conference? Or are we looking at power rankings in terms of like offensive, defensive?
Look, they're top. I mean, they're a top offense.
Okay.
So there is they are the second best team in the Eastern Conference, and I think there's a world where they get better in terms of that partnership, and that head coach gets a little more comfortable, and the team figures it out, and they improved defensively. And even with those things having not happened, not a guarantee it will, they're still second in the East. I mean, I'm not good at math, but that feels like top 4, right? Like there's 2 conferences. Yeah.
I think for me, when I look at, maybe it's the way I think of a power ranking is, yes, obviously second in the Eastern Conference means something. Should they be as low as 14? Probably not. But when I'm thinking power ranking, I'm also looking at complete teams. I'm looking offense, defense. I'm looking at, points in the paint, 3-point percent. I'm looking at everything. And there are other teams that, yes, they may be seated lower in their conference, but when we're talking about actual complete teams from multiple angles of the game, there are teams that are better than that. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment.
I think totally disagree. I mean, like there's an old saying. There's an old saying, and Bill Parcells was one of the guys who used to say it, but there's plenty of coaches that have said it over the years.
You are
what your record says.
Yes.
Right. And their record is they're the second best team in the Eastern Conference. You could nitpick really, and we could go through it. And we're going to do that with your next, because I'm glad you say you got to look at offense and defense. I'm going to bring that up later. But you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, they still are barely off the pace of the Boston Celtics. And I think that speaks volumes.